When I was first learning to mountain bike, some of the guys I was riding with gave me really good advice. It may sound very obvious, but they said, look where you want to go, not where you don't want to go. In other words, if you're coming around to a tight turn, don't look at the edge that you might fall off. Look at the place where you want to go, because your bike will actually head in that direction. Look where you want to go, not where you don't want to go. And that came to mind for me this week. As we are sort of landing the plane on a 5-week series conversation that we've called I Would Never Do That, and Other Lies We Tell Ourselves, where we've been talking about the wisdom that we need to have in life to realize that nobody plans to fall off a cliff or head into a ditch or blow up their life financially, relationally, sexually, whatever. And that we actually need to have the wisdom to put the analogy that we've borrowed for the last couple of weeks from pastor and author Andy Stanley is to put guardrails in our lives, the things that keep us well away from the edges and places we wouldn't want to go. And that actually true freedom is not just doing whatever we want, but using our freedom to limit ourselves in order to love others better. But if we were thinking about that analogy, and you think about this, when you're driving or as you learn to drive on the road, nobody was telling you, pay close attention to the guardrails, right? The idea was drive, look where you want to go. Don't stare at the edge that you want to avoid. Otherwise, you'll actually drift there. And this is really important actually in our relational lives, in our financial lives, in our family, in our schools, in our workplaces, in all the decisions that we make. Guardrails are not enough. They're wise. We need them. We need to put safeguards, like choose the right limits in our lives in order to drive in the middle part of the road. But the goal is to actually know where we want to go. And so I didn't want to do this series without landing on this. What is true north? What is the goal? What is the center of the road that we're actually heading towards? And how do we stay on it? The answer to that for you might feel like, oh, curious, maybe oversimplistic. You're not sure maybe when I actually say it. It actually may sound really simple, and it is, and yet it's incredibly difficult. It's hard to do, but I promise you it is the key, and it is the place we have to get to today when we think about how do I avoid a fall I never want to have in any area of my life? How do I actually have the relationships I want to have? What is true north? What is dead center? What am I after? To answer that question, we're actually going to look at a letter that was written by, interestingly, one of Jesus' closest friends. And he is writing to a group of Jesus followers about what he had as an eyewitness, as someone who had lived and known and walked with Jesus for 3 years in his public life. He actually begins his letter saying, that which we saw with our own eyes, touched with our hands, and heard with our ears. In other words, from what I have experienced of Jesus firsthand, this is what I want to share with you. And what he describes, I think, is actually the key. What is the center of the road? What is the true north, where we want to head to have the life we want to have? And so I'm reading from 1 John. It's a letter from John, the disciple John, in 1 John 1, verses 5 to 7. And here's what he says. This is the message we heard from Jesus, in other words, firsthand, and now declare to you. God is light, and there is no darkness in him at all. So we are lying if we say we have fellowship with God, but go on living in spiritual darkness. We are not practicing the truth. But if we are living in the light, as God is in the light, then we have fellowship with each other, and the blood of Jesus, his Son, cleanses us from all sin. The key, the center of the road, where we want to go is, are you ready for it? It's actually a Bible word, and then I'm going to translate it into an everyday word that the Bible also uses. It's this word, fellowship, or, if I can say it this way, friendship. Friendship is true north, dead center. How does that hit you? Is that curious? Is that intriguing? Are you like, that feels weak? But I actually want to camp out on this because it is so significant. I promise you, this actually unlocks the blueprint for our lives, the roadmap. As I say to couples when they come and meet with me for premarital counseling, and we inevitably talk about family background, what was the home that you grew up in like, and what was your parents' marriage like? knowing what you don't want, which sometimes we have as we come into a marriage as young couples, is not a blueprint for what you do want. So what is the blueprint? What is the road map? We have to look at where we want to go, not just stare at where we don't want to go. And what's so fascinating about this is the writer of this letter is, you've heard of maybe a biblical character named John the Baptist. We can name this one John the BFF. He's actually one of Jesus' closest friends. In fact, he calls himself, get this, the disciple or the follower that Jesus loved. And I'm sure the other guys were like, why'd you do that, right? Because he probably did it first, and then they couldn't say it because he kind of claimed it first. But that's so interesting, right? Like, this is one of Jesus' closest friends writing about friendship. And he uses the word fellowship, which when I grew up, that literally meant Rice Krispie Squares. I grew up in a church where there was like morning service and evening service. And every so often in evening service, they would say, tonight after church, we have fellowship hour, which for all of us kids and teens, we knew what that meant. Rice Krispie Squares. It was actually food. That's what they call fellowship. But it's a loaded term. It's a beautiful term. It actually is described as friendship, but in a very powerful way. This is not drinking buddy friendship. This is not someone you connect with once a year for a meal. This is not your friend on social media. This is something different. And the word fellowship from the Greek language koinonia, and even taken from Greek philosophy and the broader usage of this word in the writings around the first century, implies this idea of sharing with someone, or intimacy, if I can say this, face to face. And don't think like sexual intimacy. Think just like a closeness of love and deep friendship, like a face to face, sharing with someone, but then also sharing in something, which is more about purpose, like side by side, as in doing something together or doing something important together. These two ideas are what are contained in the biblical idea of fellowship, or what biblical friendship is, or according to the writers of the Bible, what friendship is both a face-to-face relationship of intimacy, closeness, love, and a side-by-side working together relationship of fueled with and filled with purpose. This, friends, is spiritual friendship. True spiritual friendship, a relationship of love and a relationship of purpose. And if I can say it this way, in a sense, friendship is both the journey and the destination. It's how we get to where we want to go, and it actually is where we're trying to get to go. It is true north. It is not a weak word. It is actually one of the most powerful words to describe our life with God. And I want to spend a little bit of time showing you how this passage directs us to that and what that means for us when it comes to this whole issue of I would never do that, guardrails, like guarding ourselves from decisions that we would regret. As we said, decisions that could take a moment to make and a lifetime to pay for in one sense. How spiritual friendship is the key. It is the journey and the destination. And we know like this is not some kind of airy-fairy Barney or whatever. I don't know what kids show the kids watch about friendship now. It is so gritty and real. Like in fact, we've been talking about how gritty and real life is over the last few weeks, right? Right? That's what we've been talking about, is how difficult and challenging life is. And some of the songs we've been using during this series have used this word, battle. Life is a battle. Life is war. And friendship in that context is so real. And we know this because he kind of brings up these two other words that help us realize, man, this is a battle. And he uses the word darkness and light. Now, let's talk about this for a moment. Because the biblical writers and even Greek philosophers, when they talked about the word darkness, it kind of, first of all, it's not a good thing in any way. And it has two different sides to it, or implications or ways to understand it. One is this idea of darkness as in behaviors that are not good. So choices and decisions and behaviors that are wrong, that are destructive, that are selfish, right? That when we walk in darkness, as some of this language says, John says, don't do that. He means don't walk in pathways, behaviors, choices that are wrong, that are destructive to you and others, that are selfish. And we've been talking about that, how that's often when we say, I want to do whatever I want to do. That's what freedom is, that's very selfish, and it can result in hurt and harm to others and to ourselves. That's one aspect of darkness, that is behaviors. But the other side that certainly the Greek philosophers talked about, and some of the writers in the Bible, and John here as well, darkness as a state of mind. In other words, a state of either confusion, of lostness, of being in the dark. We say that, we use that as a euphemism or whatever, or like not being able to see or understand. foolishness, like unwise choices, and not seeing clearly, a lack of understanding. And this is the two dimensions of darkness, behaviors and also a state of mind. And John says, if you're walking with Jesus, don't walk in darkness. And the reality is, nobody wants to admit that that's what they're doing, right? No one wants to admit that we're walking in darkness, that the decisions we're making are bad or wrong, or the choices we're making are unhelpful. Like, it's easy to point that out in other people, very hard to see that in ourselves, right? And even these last few weeks, we've been kind of digging up stuff that we don't want to think about and talk about. Probably, if you're anything like me, you felt I felt uncomfortable writing some of this stuff because I had to think about my own life. It's uncomfortable to think about. No one wants to think that they're walking in darkness, that they're making choices that are wrong, unhelpful, destructive, selfish, and no one wants to think that they don't understand. Nobody wants to think that they don't see things clearly. No one wants to admit that they feel lost or confused. It's like no one wants to admit that there's a dead body buried in the basement, right? Like, you're trying to hide that. I don't want to admit that I've done anything wrong. And nobody wants to talk about the attic upstairs that they kind of haven't explored, right? It's like, I don't know what's up there. I remember when we had like a mouse in the attic a long time ago. And I remember like I did not even want to go up there to look at it. I was like, oh, I don't want to see, right? So that's this idea of darkness, and we don't like it. No one wants to admit that. There's maybe a dead body in the basement. I don't want anyone to see that or know about it. Or there's an attic. I know it's kind of messy up there. I don't even want to know. I don't want to explore that. That kind of describes, John says, one way of living with God. And in contrast, he says, Jesus is the light. Actually, if you go back a few pages in the Bible, in John's biography, this same John, in his account of Jesus' life, he introduces his biography not talking about when Jesus was born and his genealogy and who his parents were. All the other biographies do. He begins poetically by saying Jesus was the light that came into the world, and he says the darkness couldn't compete with the light. It couldn't overcome the light. Jesus brings light into darkness. And then he records, actually, Jesus one time when he was speaking, calling himself the light of the world. Pretty bold claim, right? And John's point was that Jesus is the one who helps us see and understand, literally, because he himself is light. In other words, and that's why he wrote his biography of Jesus, and that's why he's writing these letters. If you want to know what the behaviors of light are, like goodness, love, beauty, look at Jesus. That's the behaviors of the light, something beautiful, something noble, something loving. Look at Jesus. We get to see what the light of the world acts like, how he lives, right? But then we also get to hear him teach how to think. That's why they called Jesus a rabbi. Jesus kept talking about truth, and truth just means reality. He was clearing up the confusion for people. Let me tell you the way things really are. Jesus' life showed us behaviors of beauty and love and gentleness and goodness, and his words taught with a clarity to help clear up misunderstanding, to help make foolish people wise, to give wisdom to understand the way things really are. That's why Jesus is called the light of the world. If you want to know how a human being is supposed to live, look at him and listen to him. Jesus, the light of the world. So he says, walk in the light as Jesus is light. Well, how do we do that? Well, he comes back to it. Fellowship with God, in verse 6, he says, when you walk in the light, it means we're having fellowship, that deep friendship with God, and fellowship with each other. Verse 7, these two things are side by side. They're not conflated. They're not the same thing. They're side by side. And when we go back to our definition of fellowship, this idea of intimacy and purpose, having a relationship that is face-to-face and side by side, he's saying this is what we're meant to have. This is what true north is. This is how you walk in the light. You have a face-to-face, intimate relationship with God where he calls you friend. And John's saying, I saw this firsthand. In other words, I've experienced that. This is one of Jesus' best friends, calls himself the best friend of Jesus. He says, this is what you can actually be friends with God. I had it. I had a friendship with God. I saw him face to face. I touched him. I hugged him. I ate with him. He taught me. He's saying this is what it means, fellowship with God, face to face of intimacy and side by side with God. He walked alongside Jesus all the time in the purpose, in the new life Jesus came to give him. And he says, to walk in the light is to have that with each other, to have relationships of intimacy, closeness, true love between each other. and relationships of purpose where we are involved in something great together, side by side. A friendship that is both about intimacy and purpose. Friends, this is true north. I think it's so relevant for the series that we've been in because we've been trying to dispel some myths, right? First of all, we've been saying, hey, this isn't about bad people doing bad things, right? This isn't about labeling certain people as bad, foolish, stupid, immoral, unwise. They're actually saying, no, we're all in the same boat. We're all capable of things we never thought we would do. But even more importantly, and I think what I want to clarify today, this isn't simply about bad things we're supposed to avoid. I was actually thinking about this. Underneath all of the choices that we might make that we regret, or the choices that we would say are crossing the line kinds of decisions or unwise decisions, I think underneath, in some ways, we are always looking for intimacy and purpose. That's actually why we sometimes end up making bad choices. We have a legitimate desire for intimacy and purpose, and we end up fulfilling that desire in a way that can't satisfy or in an illegitimate way for intimacy and purpose. Think about this for a moment. We're meant to have intimacy in our lives, closeness, love. First of all, from our birth family, like from our parents, or if we have siblings or aunts and uncles. We're meant to have that in friendships with each other and the people in our lives, our friends growing up. We're meant to have that if we get married. Our marriage is supposed to be a lifelong friendship. And yet, in so many ways and for so many reasons, those things fall short, right? Many of us didn't experience or don't experience intimacy from our family, from our parents, from our siblings. Maybe we didn't have close friends growing up, or we find ourselves like that right now. We're not really sure how to get that. Or perhaps we're in a marriage that we say, no, it's not a friendship. And when we find it, that's not a wrong thing. That's just what we were meant to have, but we don't always have it. And when we don't have it, we can be tempted to cross the line, right? That's the source of every affair, is a longing for intimacy. Looking at pornography is this idea that somehow I will feel close to someone, someone that I don't even know. That's how it begins. Or this to quell this feelings of loneliness, whether we're single or dating or married or whatever stage we're in. G.K. Chesterton, the author and journalist, the British, said, he was sort of a comedian too. He said, every man who knocks on the door of a brothel is looking for God. It's a deep longing, he said, even spiritually. Even shopping, compulsive shopping can be ways of dealing with loneliness that we feel in our lives, or lacking a sense of intimacy where we want to feel alive, we want to feel loved, we want to feel close. That's not wrong, but we can end up, if we live in a prolonged state of a lack of intimacy and closeness, ending up in destructive behaviors. Same with a lack of purpose. If we're told your purpose in life is to get a good job and to get married and to have a house and to buy these things and to be able to afford this or live this place or travel this way or have these number of letters after your name or achieve this title or build this business or achieve this career, and many people who actually achieve that, then we still feel empty. That's the language that many of the people I used to work with would use, and people I still meet today saying, I got everything I thought that would fill me up and I feel empty. Because that isn't ultimately where our purpose comes from. But if we believe that my education and my success, the number of followers or subscribers, the business I can build, the wealth I can accumulate, the stuff I can own, the titles I can have, the letters after my name, we can be driven to unhealthy, unwise, destructive decisions of workaholism, or choosing to use people or abuse power to get things, or to become detached from others as we drive away at these ideas of what it means to be successful, ending up sacrificing our relationships because we got to get that PhD and we got to get this and we got to get that. We're looking for purpose. And when we don't have it in life, we can end up crossing the line. I think underneath so many of the places and decisions that we end up making, things that we look at, and even other people that we might want to judge for just being bad or stupid or foolish or unwise or sinful, there is a longing for intimacy and purpose that we were meant to have. And here's the thing. The greatest risk we have of breaking our guardrails or crossing the lines is loneliness and purposelessness. When we live in a prolonged state of loneliness and purposelessness, you can have all the guardrails you want. They will either be ineffective or they will seem oppressive or irrelevant. They won't actually get you the life you want to have. They won't drive you true north. They may prevent a fall for a period of time, but ultimately they'll be ineffective. John says, no, friendship, fellowship with God and fellowship with each other is what walking in the light is. Relationships with God and with each other of intimacy and purpose. which means this is not simply about what we're trying not to do. It's what we're trying to do. We're trying to invest in our relationship with God, intimacy and purpose, our relationship with each other, with other followers of Jesus. And this is actually the thing that will actually ultimately help us. You know, when I think about my own journey as a young man with lust or porn or whatever, and I didn't grow up in the age of internet pornography, but it was still, you could find it if you wanted to. When I look back, one of the things that protected me significantly in those seasons when I was not particularly strong and I did not have a lot of willpower were my friends. Friendships of love. I had such good friends that were in my life, the people that I knew I could be myself with, people that loved me. So some of my friends were huggers, you know, the couple of the guys that I lived with in university, they loved to hug. We'd sit on the couch, they always have their arm around me. That was like physical intimacy. That's like a lot of us, we go and look for intimacy and physical closeness in an illegitimate way because we're meant to have it in a legitimate way, in friendships. People who really knew me, who could challenge me. And yes, we were in accountability groups and we talked to each other about, you know, these, but accountability to not do something is not really helpful. We need to hold each other accountable to the thing we want to do, to actually grow. And they did that. And I remember going away to university and I didn't know a soul, 15,000 people at this school, and I didn't know anyone. And I remember my first week sitting there in my dorm room thinking, I can be and do anything I want because nobody's here. Nobody's here to tell me what to do. But it was actually my friendships back home, the people that I loved, that I knew that they weren't going to be calling and checking up on me, but I knew when I picked up the phone to call them that if I was living a life completely different than the life I had told them I wanted to live, that we were trying to live together, that would be duplicitous. I kind of knew I would harm them. And so intimacy, closeness actually helped me a lot in that. And then as I got older, purpose began to help me in the fight as well. As I began to even long before I became a pastor, but started discipling younger guys, I realized, no, I want to model for them something that's authentic and real, not perfect, but a life that is going after something good. And when I started to realize other people were looking to me for influence to hold them up, I'm like, God, I don't want to do anything to let them down. And then when I became a pastor, I'm like, I don't want to come into the pulpit on Sunday with a word that I feel like is important to say, but I have done something that has sapped me of the power of the Holy Spirit. I don't want to do that. I shudder to think that the longer I live as a pastor, the more I'm like, I don't want to let my church down. And that's a good thing. Why? Because I have a sense of purpose. Well, then when God began to wreck my heart for the issue of human trafficking back in 2012. And I started to get into the issue and realize how problematic human trafficking was and how pornography was linked into this whole objectification of women and girls. And it started to change how I saw every woman in the world. And I was like, wait a second, any temptation that came up on the computer, any clickbait or whatever, or even someone walking by or drove past the bus stop, I'm like, I don't want to use another person. This is happening all over the world. I don't want to be part of this anymore. I had a new purpose. It wasn't just, try not to do a bad thing, try not to look at something bad. And then Jen and I talked about raising our boys to say, hey, we don't just want them to get through life not doing anything bad, not looking at anything bad or whatever. We want them to change the way young men see women in the world and act and live. It's a new purpose. Intimacy and purpose ultimately were the keys in changing that battle for me. And I think that applies to every area of our lives. Now, here's the thing. That, in one sense, is simple, as I've explained. It's not a complicated thing. We want it, but we don't want to do the work for it. It is hard work. It's not simple. It's not difficult to understand. It's hard to do. To actually invest in cultivating a relationship with God of closeness and purpose and relationship with each other. And in particular, the relationships we have in the body of Christ, in the family of Christ, for those of us that say, I'm a Jesus follower. And even if you're new and you're exploring faith, you're not quite there. This is the picture of what does this really look like to be people of faith? Let me ask you, who really knows you? Who really knows you? And here's a couple of questions that came to mind as you think about that. Do we allow people close enough? Or do we aim to get close enough to people in our lives and friendships to actually be able to experience intimacy and a shared sense of purpose? Do we have people we can confess to? Like when we need to talk about the dead body in the basement. Do we have people we trust that we could be honest with them? We can't be honest like that with everyone, but there's got to be somebody in our lives that we feel like we can. Or do we have people who help us know ourselves more, who are willing to help us explore the attic? I've had people in my life who said, hey, you kind of seemed upset about that, or you seem like, what's that about? Or you've mentioned that a couple times. What is that about? That's going up exploring the attic that I haven't thought about, the stuff that, the darkness that I haven't seen. That's not about the dead body in the basement. We need people to talk to about that, but we need people who will help us understand ourselves more. do we even know how to go there in our friendships? I think that is hard for us for a few reasons. Some of us, we're kind of stuck in the old or inherited patterns of how we relate. Like if our family, if we didn't really know how to do that, if intimate things were never talked about, languages of love, we never expressed love to each other, or if people didn't ask us, or we weren't taught to know ourselves and to think and to emotionally connect, that can be very hard to do. We don't know how to do that maybe in our marriage or with our friendships. We talked last week about the impact of media. Do you know the word media from the Latin means something in between? We have so many screens that now sit in between us and other people. And we can hide behind those screens or sit behind those screens, in a sense, keep people from knowing us and from being and from knowing others. We can, and it's easy to criticize others from behind that screen, and our culture does that well. It's very hard to be vulnerable ourselves. We don't post about the stuff that's really going on in our lives under the surface. We post about what other people are doing, but we're not good at knowing what's underneath. At our men's retreat a couple weeks ago, we watched a documentary on the Friday night that I think was a bit shocking for all of us. It was called The Work. And it's actually about a therapy program run by incarcerated men in Folsom Prison. And they invite men from the outside to come in together. And really, they have these groups, these therapy groups with mixed groups of those who are incarcerated and those who are not, of exploring the darkness. And there was a couple moments in that movie where when one of the guys, something was coming up for them, either they were getting emotional, or they were getting angry, or they said, oh, I think I need to, or something came up for me and they stopped talking. Another one would say, stand up. And they would get so close to each other, like so close that you imagine that is so uncomfortable, face to face. And then they would say, no, don't look away, don't look away, don't look away. It was this moment of extreme face-to-face intimacy and closeness, and a shared purpose of saying, we're going to work through something together. I'm not going to let you stuff that emotion. I saw tears in your eyes. I'm not going to let you shove it back down. You mentioned that thing about your dad, and now you want to move on. No, I'm not going to let you get away with it. Or you just said a comment. What is that about? Look you in the eye. We need to go there. It's hard for us to be face-to-face. Tribalism, actually, which social media fuels, also keeps us from, because tribalism allows us to just stay with people who think and act and believe all the same things. We don't need to question ourselves what's below the surface because we know we're right, because we live in the echo chamber of our tribe, whether that's a political tribe or a social tribe or a religious tribe or whatever it is. And in fact, faith communities have become groups of people who share the same beliefs instead of people who actually share love for the same God and who are trying to walk in the light with each other, where we don't just say what the other person wants to hear. We're willing to offer each other counter perspectives and to go there. Friends, these are the hurdles we need to overcome if we're actually going to have friendships like this. And actually, the last few weeks, it's kind of what we've been doing is talking about what's under the surface, just digging it up. Maybe it's been uncomfortable. It has for me. I'm sure it has for many of you. But getting to that point where true friendship, the greatest gift we can offer each other, is being willing to go there, to learn how to help each other get close to God, intimacy, face-to-face, find a shared purpose that we have to walk in friendship together. And so just a couple of practical things for you as we close. When it comes to friendship with God, I guess one of the questions we have to think about is how do I connect with God? One of the books that was super helpful for me in this, because the simple answer can be, read your Bible and pray every day, or whatever, go to church. But Gary Thomas wrote a book called Sacred Pathways, and he actually describes 9 different ways. He said we're all wired a bit differently, and all of the ways are actually helpful, and we need bits of all of it. But because of our personality and our wiring and our story, we gravitate to certain ways that are the most helpful for us to connect with God. He said there are the naturalists, those of us who are naturalists, we come close to God through nature, through being outside. The traditionalists come close to God through ritual and symbol. They love high church, stained glass, images, pictures. The activists come close to God through bringing about social change, doing stuff, making a difference. The enthusiasts come close to God through celebration and mystery, being with others. The intellectuals come close to God through their minds, reading, podcasts, listening, thinking, studying. The sensates come close to God through the senses, what they can see, what they can smell, what they can hear, what they can feel. The ascetics come close to God through solitude and simplicity and silence. Caregivers come close to God when they're caring for and serving others. And then contemplatives come close to God through personal adoration and heartfelt devotion, and usually in deep reflection. So we actually thought, let's take 5 minutes, and there's a little survey that's going to be on the screen for you. You can scan the QR code that will ask you a series of questions to help you understand what your spiritual pathways might be, like which are the highest, which are the ones that you gravitate to the most. So you'll have 5 minutes to do that. There'll be a little timer on the screen. Don't worry, you'll have enough time. And even if you run out of time, you can just keep the link open in your browser or whatever, and we'll send it out in the midweek as well if you miss it. But this is just to help you understand, well, yeah, how do I get close to God? So let's take 5 minutes and do that. hey, well, maybe you had time to finish that. Even if you didn't, just keep the browser open on your phone and you can tune out and finish now, or just do it later. But based on what kind of comes out as your top pathways, ask yourself this, based on this, right? If I want to do the work of getting close to God, face to face with him, side by side with him, I probably need to prioritize blank more in my week. I know for me, I took this survey a little while ago. I never realized I love being outdoors in nature. Like I don't like camping and all that stuff, but like I am an outdoors person. I realized I need to do this regularly as a part of my Sabbath. And so that's something for you to think about. Now let's talk about just practically your friendship with others. And so here's a couple questions to think about. If this is both about fellowship with God and fellowship with others, which activities are a regular, and when I say regular, I say weekly or semi-weekly part of my life? To think about time with friends who share my faith and values. Okay, so people who are actually, to use the analogy, on the journey with me, on the same road. Not that you can't spend time with people who aren't, but if you're not ever spending time with people who are, it's really going to be hard to grow in intimacy and purpose with them, right? And that shared sense of purpose. Am I participating in a home group on a regular basis? Am I serving alongside a few others? That's part of that shared purpose, that side by side. Am I hosting others in my home, giving other people a chance to know me and to see me up close? Really, like if you don't journey with people for a long period of time, you're not close enough for them to see some of the darkness in you and you in them to be able to help each other grow, right? Like that takes time and mileage on the friendship. And then if you think about these questions, which of these relationships needs to get more honest and close, right? Like if you're in a home group, you're like, yeah, but we never go there. So go there. And actually just say it, guys, we never go there. We've been meeting together for X, and I don't know this about this, you, and you don't know this about me, or we talk about this, but we never quite get past, right? We don't ask each other more questions. We need to go there. There's no point just showing up with people who kind of think all the same with you, having a little bit of conversation. That will not change your life. In relationships of intimacy and closeness will. Or perhaps the people you're serving with are getting involved or making those more intentional. Or like a friendship that you've had with another person who you know is a Jesus follower, but you've never even prayed together. You've spent so much time together. You never try it the next time to say, hey, could we pray together before we leave or before we get off the phone, or text them, hey, can I pray with you? Or can you pray for me? Friends, this is hard to do, but these are the walls we have to breach, the areas we have to broach to get into these places so those friendships become truly satisfying the need we have for intimacy and purpose in our lives. Which of these relationships need to get more honest and close, and what is my role in that? I'm hoping these questions will help you, help us drive at, invest in, look at where we really want to go, the place we want to go, which is relationships of intimacy, face to face with God, that closeness, filling that deep need all of us have for love and friendship, for physical touch even with our friends, and then side by side in a shared purpose, a shared mission in the world. It should not be lost on us that when God chose to save the world, he chose to do it in person. Jesus himself took on flesh and came into our world. And when he did, the first thing he did was gather a group of friends. This is fellowship with God, fellowship with each other. That's what it means to walk in the light, to stay the center of the road. We're going to actually have a moment now where we do something that the church, that the Jesus followers have been doing for 2,000 years, this act of communion or the Lord's Supper or the Eucharist, which is actually a symbol of both those things, friendship with God, and we do this together, friendship with each other.